yesterday. Meanwhile, here at home, a Washington, D.C. Metro Transit officer was charged yesterday with attempting to provide material support to ISIS, making him the first U.S. law enforcement officer to be charged with aiding the terrorist group. Joining us right now is Pinal County, Arizona Sheriff Paul Babeu. Sheriff, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, so let me get your take on what's happening with regards to terrorism and what should be done about it. Obviously, this is not quieting down, and it is getting worse.
Absolutely. Well, we have to be far more aggressive. The approach President Obama has taken clearly has not worked. We are at war, yet we have not declared war. And we're fighting. He sends 50 soldiers over to Syria to defeat ISIS. Then he says we're really going to defeat them, and he sends 250 more. That's not a way. I'm a retired Army officer, served in Iraq. That's not a way to defeat your enemy. And we have to be more aggressive here at home as well in terms of identifying, routing out homegrown terrorist cells. You can't wait years. You can't interview these suspects multiple times and then all of a sudden scratch your head, wonder how these things have occurred when we've had clue upon clue.
We're with Mayor Giuliani this morning, and Mr. Mayor, we haven't heard a substantial plan from Hillary Clinton either, but how would Donald Trump handle this? I mean, in a practical way.
I think he's pointed out that, first of all, it begins with you got to recognize your enemy. I mean, you can't fight the Nazis unless you realize you're fighting the Nazis. You can't fight the fascists or the communists unless you realize you're fighting the communists. We're fighting an ideology, and the president refuses to embrace that. And until you can see the connections between what happened with that cop and what happened in Orlando and what happened in Paris and what happened in Nice and the Catholic priest whose head was chopped off, unless you see that as all connected, having investigated very complicated cases, including terrorism cases, it's the connections that allow you to be predictive, to start looking for the precursors of terrorism that the sheriff's police department is now stuck with. This is a new responsibility for our police. The FBI has to be much more open and has to have outreach to all the 800,000 local police officers. There are eyes and ears. They have to be taught to look for the precursors of terrorism. Obama's not doing any of this. Hillary isn't doing it. Hillary has caused a lot of this when she was Secretary of State, with overthrowing Mubarak, overthrowing Gaddafi. Now, where's one of ISIS's big homes? In Libya.
Right.
The Libya that she created.
There's actually a connection.
You want to go ahead, Sheriff?
Please, Sheriff.
There's a connection with this actual transit officer. Back in 2011, he's traveled to Libya twice to be part of the overthrow of Gaddafi. And Customs and Border Protection actually searched through his bags while he was traveling and found Kevlar helmets, body armor.
Wow.
Those are clues.
Yeah.
And at that time, why on earth did not our federal agents share this information with the chief of this transit authority in Washington, D.C.? Because if that guy worked for me, those are clues. I'd question that officer and he'd be fired. Why was he fired just this week?
Yeah.
Can I add to what the sheriff is saying? Same thing with the Boston Marathon. The Russian intelligence told us that Tsarnaev was a terrorist. The FBI investigated it. They concluded not enough evidence. Then Tsarnaev went to Russia, and he went to the Chechnya area. That had to be a big clue, like lights should have gone off. Now, I know, because I work with the FBI most of my life, they don't have the resources to follow up on all this. But why didn't they tell the Boston Police Department? That information should have been shared with the Boston Police Department. Or if it happened in New York, I mean, Bratton would have gone crazy.
And a lot of these stories Donald Trump painted going into the election. I mean, he basically said this is what's happening. He put this front and center. New Fox poll, though, shows voters trust Hillary Clinton more on immigration than Trump, giving her a 7% edge on this issue that's so central to Trump's platform.
Well, what I liked about that poll is leading among independents. In fact, it's much easier to get the Republicans back than it is to get independents to vote for you. That 75% of Republicans will end up being at least 85 or 90 by the time we come to election.
You think he'll get the Republican?
They're going to come back. Well, they're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Not with all this stuff happening in the world. I mean, I thought that whole incident with the priest having his head chopped off and the Democratic convention saying nothing about it.
They didn't do a moment of silence.
Not even like 1 minute of prayer for a priest who's taken down off the altar and his head is chopped off, like we're in the 6th century.
That was disgusting.
And Obama's in no century. He's on Mars, I think.
Yeah.
How about the fact, just really quickly, about those sexual assaults in Cologne, Germany, which were overlooked and ignored, particularly in this country? Mass sexual assaults by refugees and migrants from these Middle Eastern countries into Germany and ignored. And that's what happens.
Yeah, you're right. And that wasn't talked about enough in the media. No. That was horrible. And you're really on the front lines in terms of the immigration issue, Sheriff. What's your thought on border control?
We don't have it. I could tell you here, being on the ground, we've had 82,000, 123,000 illegals apprehended each year just in this part of Arizona alone. And when you hear Hillary Clinton want to increase the number of refugees, asylum seekers, 550% here from the Middle East and from Europe, my God, have you seen Europe, Germany, take Central Americans, Mexicans by the hundreds of thousands here? We don't see this support coming from other countries. Why don't we put our country, our families, our national security first for once? That's what I want, and that's what Donald Trump has been saying. And you can see the failures of our country because the leader of America, President Obama, believes that the top concern for our country in terms of national security isn't ISIS, isn't terrorism, isn't an unsecured border. In fact, he says it's global warming.
Right. He said
this
climate
is why
change.
we're failing.
Unbelievable.
Correct.
Sheriff, good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much for your insight.